Morning, Belder called out, as she made her way through the cafeteria, balancing her tray, and settled into her chair for breakfast. No one was talking. No one was eating. Good morning? Belder tried again, frowned a bit, as she looked over the gathering. Priscilla nodded back and shrugged. Morning, Belle. And don't ask me, they've been like this ever since I got here. We're waiting for Lynn and Mara, Deshin said softly. Melondi, Nesta and Kellark nodded, while Nesta huddled deeper into her chair. Down at the end of the table, Scifi was anxiously tapping her fingers, while Jacksmi kept thumbing through her omnipad with a frown like thunder. Belder suddenly looked back to Priscilla, who shrugged again. They aren't saying anything but that they're waiting for Casma and Kamara. Priscilla shook her head and blew the steam from her cup of tea. Something about comparing notes is all I can get out of them. Where are they? Growled Scifi. I can't believe they're late. Belder glanced over at Pris, who only shrugged and shook her head before looking back at Scifi. I'm surprised you're here. You almost always skip breakfast for swimming practice, don't you? Practice will wait today, Scifi bit out. We all agreed we were going to compare notes this morning, and no one is saying a thing until we're all here. Belder looked around at the other girls, hoping for some sort of comment, but nothing was forthcoming. This isn't about the papers due tomorrow. I got mine done yesterday. I mean, you all look like someone's died. No one died, did they? Kellark sighed heavily. No one died, Belle. It's just that we all tried something last night, and we promised not to talk about it until we're all here. We're just getting a little anxious. They're being a little dramatic, but we did promise, Melondi said, as she hunched down over her breakfast and moodily stabbed at her papaya while rubbing her forehead. Hey, there they are, Priscilla gestured to the door, and the group looked over to see one of the twins dragging the other out of the serving line and toward them. Maybe we can get down to the bottom of this now. Sorry, Kazan says she's only had 4 hours of sleep. Kamara settled into a chair a moment after Kazan slumped into hers. It was dessert. I blame the dessert, groaned Lynn, and she groped for her tea. You only got 4 hours of sleep because of dessert? You're joking, right? Asked Belder incredulously. Seriously? Growled Jacksmi. Take the best thing you've ever had and multiply it by sex. Belder looked skeptical, and under the weight of several calculating looks, Jacksmi ducked her head and slowly withered. Okay, I don't know about the sex part, but it's really that good. It wasn't just a dessert, it was the dessert. The dessert we were given to try last night. Kellark breathed in agreement, then looked at the others. We're all here, so I'll say it. That was incredible. I've never tasted anything like it, Nesta said, as she set down her omnipad. No wonder we wanted to get hold of Earth. They have this. This! Chocolate. I've had it 3 times, Jacksmi whispered. My uncle sent it to me once, then promised me a bar every birthday, as long as I got top scores. I never worked so hard in my life. Melondi gave a half-hearted shrug. I looked it up too. That's what it is. Our mothers have had this, whispered Kamara, before looking around to see if anyone was near, before leaning in to lower her voice. They were at a gala being held by a duchess. They wouldn't stop talking about it for weeks. Chocolate. Scifi tried out the word. And the filling. Don't forget the filling. Nutella, supplied Deshin quietly. Even Kazan nodded at that, as she scowled at her breakfast. The datanet says they even eat it for breakfast. Oh, goddess, that's not fair. And a duchess can get it too? Goddess, I bet the Empress has it every day. Oh, come on, muttered Kellark. That's a bit unfair. I mean, the press would hear about it. Or something. What I want to know is why. Deshin leaned in, whispering loudly. The other girls paused to look around at the nearby tables and give her a harsh look, and she looked around quickly, abashed. I mean, why is it just getting here now? It's so good, she whispered. I can tell you that, said Belder, speaking up. As the others looked over, she shrugged quickly. I'm from Willist. My mother is a senior administrator and is an agricultural world. Every time something new comes into the Empire, it has to spend 10 years in quarantine, while the Ministry of Alcohol, Drugs and Food evaluates it. I mean, I even heard about human food in Willist. There was some talk about the ADF letting it in early, since humans are so much like Shilvanti, but my mother said there was something that held it up. They wouldn't talk about it, just that it was something dangerous. I bet they meant mint, Scifi whispered. There is something on Earth. They call it mint. Some of the girls I dive with in the summer told me about it. They say it can make a Shilvanti just as, it gets you horny as a human. She said humans even brush their teeth with it. That led to a lot of thoughtful looks. But this isn't dangerous, Balondi grumbled. Well, except for being delicious. She's right. We have to go back to the restaurant and get it. Cousin stabbed at her pluver in aggravation and nodded firmly. All right, I'm in, said Priscilla. Me too, Belder added promptly, nodding enthusiastically. Me free, chimed in Nesta. Hey, I didn't even get to go back for that lunch, but I'm in. Please? You haven't even had it, grumbled Scifi, as she pondered the size of Burdin's stockpile. Maybe not, but I want in. Priscilla raised her eyebrows and nodded at Belder and Nesta before looking back to the others. You all want to go back and get it all? That's the price of our silence. You can't breathe a word about this, hissed Balondi. Fair enough, agreed Priscilla, as she picked up her tea and raised a mock toast, before carrying on matter-of-factly. Anyway, we just have to keep it quiet, right? I don't see what the big deal is. Just go back and buy all of it once they open. You don't get it, Jacksme whispered back. This stuff is amazing. Even if they start bringing it in by shiploads, as soon as the merchants get any idea what they have in their hands, the price will go through the roof. She's right. Belder's brow creased in thought. It's just supply and demand. Willis supplies almost half the food and shill, and it's just one agricultural world. Earth isn't developed for mass exports like that. Can you imagine what happens to the price when news gets out? With women wanting it all over the Imperium, you'll need to be at least a baroness to afford it. That means this may be the only chocolate and Nutella we'll be able to afford for years, Kellogg said to Priscilla, as dawning realization hit. Jacksme was already furiously making notes. As your advisor, I say we don't let that happen, Deshin breathed, though a look of uncertainty crossed her features as she pondered her meagre funds. I have to be there at the museum to help the professor. I can't go. And what if he won't sell it to us? Scifi wrung her hands. What if Mr. Dasari has figured it out already? We could say that Professor Warwick wanted it, maybe, offered Kellogg. That's no good. Balondi shook her head and grimaced. I don't want us to lie about it. Anyway, the professor said he's going to be going back there a lot, but Im might say something, or the professor might notice it's gone, and then we'd be caught. She's right, conceded Kamara, before Kazan chimed in. That's no good. The table went silent as they considered that. I can't go either. I still have to finish the essay for tomorrow, said Melondi fretfully. I can't go either. I have economics, groused Jacksme. So then, who can go, and what's the plan? You promised what? Mavere cried out in utter disbelief, bolting upright in bed and staring at Tom like he'd lost his mind. She wanted to pull her hair out as he lay back on the pillow, trying to look innocent. How could you do that? Look, it was worse. Tom gave an abashed smile. I did talk her down in the end. He tried to rally. You call 2 dates and an interview talking her down? Mavere was quivering with anxiety and outrage. How can you call that talking her down? Tom sat up in bed and grimaced, but slipped an arm around her waist. Look, it's 2 dates and an interview. That's just 3 days of my time, and it buys a lifetime for Nesta. You know that's worth the trade-off, right? He said, before leaning in to kiss her on the shoulder. Mavere grimaced at that, but sighed, and tried to collect her thoughts. It was a struggle, but she leaned over and rested her forehead against his hair. It wasn't fair at all, but after the day before, she wasn't about to argue the point. All right, you're right about that, but an interview? You're going to have to tell Ganya. I know when we tell her why, she'll agree, but she'll want you briefed by our public affairs girls before you go anywhere near a camera. That's fair. Anyway, you wanted to take me to your home off campus this shell, and I'm really looking forward to it. I can ask her to make it the shell after this. Mavere closed her eyes and buried her face in his hair for a minute. Yes, I don't get out there very often, and there's someone I need you to meet. She felt Tom squeeze her tight, and she breathed a sigh of relief. It's a good thing I talked her down from 5 dates. Huh? What? It had only been 2 days since the human professor, Tom Warwick, had dropped into Burdin's life. He'd given up his job as the executive chef of a 6-sun restaurant. Tip of the Needle had been a beautiful restaurant, built on a rotating floor at the very top of the Imperial Mark Hotel, slowly spinning on its axis, treating guests to stunning panoramas of the capital city, along the crystalline azure waters of the ocean beyond. When the sunset caressed the waves over dinner, it was the most stunning restaurant in the entire galaxy. But who cared? Just 2 days on, human food was taking off, and profits were going up, up, up! Burdin was happier by the day. He had the right location, right food, right atmosphere, and as he checked his makeup and fussed at his lime green cravat one final time before opening, he was just playing right all over. Flowing out of the back office and through the kitchen, he made his way to open for the morning. Places, people, places! Everyone needs to be perfect today. Get that bacon cooking, because we are on fire! Sweeping the door from the kitchen open with a flourish, he felt his heart flutter with a thrill to see people waiting outside the entrance. Why, there must be at least a dozen milling about before opening. Just the bacon was flying off the shelf, since it had gone on the menu, and he was going to have to ride Nixie and order more beef, more buns, more bacon, more everything. And the menu was still only a dozen items long. Burdin thumbed the lock and opened the front door, dropping into an elaborate bow with a graceful flourish of his arm to wave guests inside, while his waitstaff stood to attention. Holding the oh-so-elegant pose with unmatchable poise, he counted as almost 20 people filed in, and the day was only starting. 4 pairs of feet were still standing in front of him as the last customers filed inside, and he slowly looked up. It was those girls from the academy, and despite himself, his eyes flickered around fearfully to see if Professor Tom had slipped past, or was standing behind him. As for the girls, Nesfa Roche stood off to the left in her academy uniform, with the white pinstripe lapels stark against the spotless black of her jacket. Her jet black hair was worn long, spilling over her shoulders as she peered winsomely out from under the bangs over her forehead. To the right, Belda Sasona wore a smart purple dress shirt under a lilac and black striped pinafore dress that ended just over her knees. Her cheeks dimpled as she smiled prettily, teasing at the pigtail that ran down along her left cheek, while in the centre, Kamara and Kaz and Kerbal stood there, in matching mini sundresses of soft teal. Even as Burdin's brain started to freeze over, he couldn't help notice that the twins wore their braids on opposite sides, perfectly complementing each other. Their breasts swelled as the twins clapped their hands together in perfect timing and leaned slowly forward. "Oh, Mr. Dasari!" Their voices rang out in perfect harmony. "We're so glad to see you," the one on the left cooed, before the other took over, batting her eyes. "We just have to talk to you in the kitchen, please?" The four smiles were like the blinding sun coming out on a rainy day. Burdin swallowed. "You have the cases?" Belder said again, as she leaned back on the wall beside the kitchen door, before craning her head quickly to look over the dining room. The coast was clear, and she breathed a sigh of relief as the murmuring of conversations filled the room, and waiters moved about. "The coast is clear. Go, go, go!" Kaslin, Kamara, and Nesfa looked around as well. It wasn't remotely possible to hide the cardboard boxes each of them was clutching to their chest, but they did their best. "Walk for the exit. Just try and look natural," whispered Nesfa, as Belder led the way out of the hall and weaved in between the other diners. "Should we have lunch before we go?" whispered one of the twins, as they fell into single file behind Nesfa and Belder. "Are you crazy after what you two did?" whispered the other. They had just neared the exit when Belder suddenly stopped short. "Hey!" cried one twin. "What's going on?" said the other, while Nesfa fought to recover her grip on the box she was carrying. It's stammered Belder. It's a boy," gasped Nesfa, as she recovered and leaned forward, slowly peering over Belder's shoulder. Kaslin and Kamara looked at one another and shrugged, before leaning out to opposite sides and looking around the girls blocking the way. "Oh, goddess, it is a boy," said one, before biting her lip. Her sister nodded quickly for a moment as she stared. Just outside the shop was a figure in faded blue jeans and a light grey hoodie, with the hood pulled back, head bowed over his underpad. His slouched posture did little to hide the odd, in-between height and ash-brown hair fell over pale blue-grey eyes, as he shook his head and lifted his gaze from the pad. Brushing his hair back, he looked up at the shop sign, then the door. "That's not just a boy. It's a human boy." Liam double-checked the address of the restaurant on his omnipad. Yes, this was the place, and unfortunately he was far from the first person here, despite his best efforts to evade his sister and get here early. He sighed. He was so dead when he got back. He'd hoped that he'd be able to return with spoils to justify the trip, and pacify his overprotective sibling, but from the looks of things he'd be lucky to get inside, much less get anything to eat. Shadows fell over the omnipad, and he lifted his head. His eyes widened slightly. Holy hell, is that a pair of twins? 4 girls dressed to the nines. And he hadn't even known that Shovanti had twins. These two were playing up the resemblance too. They literally looked like mirror images of each other. His eyes flickered over the 4, making brief eye contact with each of them. Luckily, they seemed as dumbstruck by him as he was by them. Despite the odds, he recovered first. Dropping his gaze, he stared at the omnipad. "Don't be rude, but make it clear you're not interested," he told himself. His mouth opened. "Excuse me," he said carefully, in clear trade shill. "Please stop staring at me like that. The shop's name is Human Food, not Humans Are Food, and I promise I'm not on the menu." "God damn it, Mouth. What did I just tell you?" Belder juggled her case of Nutella, before giving him an easy laugh and a smile. "Unless you're better than chocolate, you're safe from us." Liam found himself looking up in surprise. He'd been bracing for anger after getting lippy. Few sure Auntie could take a joke, he found. Particularly ones rich enough to dress that well, and be carting off boxes of imported goods, like tusked Norsewomen gone a-Viking. He found himself making eye contact with the shortest of the group. He couldn't call her petite, she seemed too solid for that. But the pinafore made him think of Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. Please, Malv, no comments about not being in Kansas anymore. Well, that's a relief, he said, some tension draining visibly from his shoulders, his lips curving into a wiry smile. Still, as charming as you all are, you're still between me and the chance of bacon. Unless you stuff some in... Is that Nutella? He laughed. Nesfa gave the cardboard box of Nutella a shake after she opened it up. The word was prominent enough that they picked it out, and there seemed to be whole tubs inside, each holding a vat of the spread along with breadsticks. One of the twins looked over from the other seat in the cab. Oh, those look interesting. How many are in the box? I was just trying to figure that out. A lot. 3 or maybe 4 for each of us. Nessa peered back into the box and gave it a shake. Now, you see? Was that all really so much drama? She said primly. She's right, sniffed Caslin, as she bounced her box on her knees, testing its weight. Kamara looked over at her sister, and over at Nesta in disbelief. You waved a cleaver in his face. He didn't want to sell, and we did not, Nesta mumbled defensively, as she closed up the box. We just picked one up, sort of. It may be the only chocolate on the planet. Goddess, if Jax is right, it's the only chocolate we'll be able to afford for years and years, protested Caslin. I call that an appropriate level of drama, Nesta said assertively, as if that ended the matter. Besides, Belda escorting Liam home? All by herself? What a lucky Turox. I mean, at least one of us needed to take him home. The girls at his school should never have let him sneak out like that to get a meal. But why did he choose her? You know, I like Belle, but what has she got that we haven't got? Caslin grumbled bitterly, before giving a firm nod. There had better be details. I know, Kamara sniffed primly, before nodding like her sister. Lots and lots of details. No chocolate, until we get the full story. Deshin usually loved the practical humanity class. That was a relief because, for better or worse, she'd hooked her future to it. Maybe Jacksmith was right, and she'd be able to find a host of good jobs on Earth just waiting for her at graduation. It had been a while now, and word hadn't gotten out that she wasn't from a noble family. She was just starting to breathe easily. That's what made the email before class so disturbing. She always sent her non-birth mothers an email every few weeks. It was a habit, mostly, since after the first year they made it pretty clear that they hadn't cared where she'd been, so long as she wasn't underfoot. They'd also made it clear enough when she came back for summer break that she was an imposition. That wasn't exactly new, since they told us so often enough. After her birth mother died, that was all she was to them, an extra mouth not pulling her weight. She wasn't even under any illusions about her mother. She died when Desi was young, and while her co-mothers didn't talk about it, marriages like theirs were common enough. Poor girls would sometimes group up to find a really poor boy, and they'd all get together to put a better roof over their heads than they could alone. At some point her father had left, saying he could do better. That was just life in a service town, the size of a pinprick. It hadn't been a great way to grow up, but Deshin knew her only way out was by being smart. She wasn't marine material, and the Navy never interested her. From the time she realised that at 6 years old, she'd given school everything she had, every single day. Now she just had to get through this year of school and 2 more. That was all. It was even going well. She'd made friends from her first day at the academy, finding some difficult girls, but a lot more who were just as smart as she was. They never put her down for having her nose in a book or studying hard, and finding other girls who enjoyed learning as much as she did was a relief. Alright, Their lives definitely didn't depend on it, and she hated lying about her home, but she did her best, and she loved both the academy and her friends. That made yesterday all the more important. Helping Professor Warwick at the museum had been a lot of fun, and he was starting to teach her basic English while he got an actual class put together. When she made it home to the dorm that afternoon, the girls had actually had a share of chocolate set aside, just for her. They hadn't even asked her credit for her portion, which was an embarrassing relief. Expenses the others took for granted would have decimated the savings she'd taken years to scrape together before sneaking into the academy. It made her feel uneasy so many times. Scifi was one of the first friends she'd made at school, and she never once dared to breathe a word about what she was. She didn't have any choice, but it was to a lie. The chocolate was above and beyond, though. She'd decided last year that she needed to be the best friend she could be to the others, but this was just too much. She'd been having fun with calling herself an advisor, but helping out with the show and such had made her think that maybe she could offer a bit more. Maybe she could be an advisor. Something like a study group might help the others pull their grades up just a bit. She could help Jaxby and the professor with the clothing replicator too. She learned to master it well enough that her school clothing could pass muster against all the outfits that never even saw a machine. Not that she could admit it. Only poor people wore clothes that weren't bespoke. She just wanted to give back to her friends in any ways that she could. Not that all the girls were easy. Desala digging at her before class, and insinuating she was just trying to be the teacher's pet. That had made her mad, but she only held her head up high and smiled enigmatically, right back at the prissy bitch. Silence seemed to make Desala madder than anything. Even knowing that her co-mothers wouldn't care, she sent a note anyway, just like she'd done her first year away. That was what bothered her. It bounced back. Address not found. She'd been fretting about it through half the class, but she still paid attention. There were only about 10 minutes left, and she kept close notes as Professor Warwick turned around. Now then. The battleship USS Maine sank in Hanover Harbour. Who can speak to its context in drumming up the war that followed? It was an interesting topic, and made her wonder how one tiny event could turn the fate of empires, but Professor Pellavon's comparisons had been startling. Sure, there was always going to be an empress, but for a while, there had been empires contending across Shill. It was so long ago it seemed almost impossible to believe in, but comparing those times to Earth's recent history made pre-space Shill seem alive and real in ways she'd never considered. Deshin's hand shot up along with half the others, and the professor turned around to pick a name. She heard the giggle, just as Tom Warwick's face clouded over like a stormy sky. Mr. Sala, since you are so eager to communicate, perhaps you can do it with your mouth instead of your omnipad. Deshin didn't turn back to look, but she couldn't help grinning a tiny bit as she heard the clatter of the omnipad drop on the desk. It didn't help that someone in the class sniggered, not that Warwick was finding any humour in it. Mr. Sala, I am waiting. Deshin still didn't look back, but she could hear the other girl shift around in her seat before she spoke. The ship blew up in the harbour, and almost the whole crew was killed, and it was used to increase tensions to war between America and Spain. Warwick nodded. Those are the facts. Indeed, those are the facts I only just spoke of. What I asked for was context. I want to hear your thoughts, Mr. Sala. As the silence grew longer, Deshin couldn't help but look back along with most of the class. Desala Sehat was sitting there with her mouth slightly open, looking like a stunned Turox. Let me make this easier for you. Warwick stepped forward to the foot of the stairs, looking up at Desala. Would you say that the pace of events outstripped the facts, Mr. Sala? No reply came from behind her, and she watched Warwick take a step up to the first riser and regard her. Yes, Mr. Sala. No, Mr. Sala. The professor's eyebrow rose and aggravation crept into his voice as he took the steps up to the second riser. Partly? Deshin had never seen this side of Warwick before, but he was, well, not angry, but vexed. Not that she couldn't understand. Paying attention to an instructor was drilled into every Shorvanti from their first day of school, and sitting there playing around and messaging on an omnipad and giggling like, well, it was so disrespectful that it didn't bear thinking about. Nothing. I've asked you to communicate your thoughts, and you are offering nothing. Warwick scowled at the girl, then down at her omnipad as it lay on the desk, before turning his back and walking down to his desk. Tom was just leaning down and disconnecting his omnipad from the classroom screen when a flicker of movement caught his eye. Belda Susana had a lot of fine qualities. Her questions tended to be intelligent, but she had a bent towards being forthright in her view of the world. Maybe it wasn't pragmatism, but something even better. What struck him most was her friendly, outgoing manner. He would have envied it, her age, while still finding her approachable. She had the kind of easy-to-talk-to manner he stopped just short of labelling wholesome, since the word had always had a tinge of naivety to it in his mind, and Belda certainly wasn't that. Seeing her twisting uncertainly in front of his desk was something new, though. Miss Belda? Was there a question you didn't get to ask in class? Tom asked, as he clinched his backpack closed and stood up, considering the girl. Well, yes. Please, Professor? She glanced around nervously as the others left, before looking over to where Mavere was packing up. Whatever was on her mind seemed to press her forward, as she blurted out, I was wondering if you could give me some advice. I met a boy. He's from Canada. Desala was fuming as she stalked out of the hall. She even left Letzi trailing in her wake as she strode off. The nerve! Embarrassing her like that just because she'd... Well, alright, she hadn't been paying attention, but being caught just made it worse. Walking right up and staring a hole through her with those blue and white eyes of his, and expecting her to have an answer just like that. Alright, she was supposed to have answers, but it was the others laughing that made her blood boil. They had actually laughed out loud, at her. She bet anything they were all chuckling and talking about her as soon as they left. She'd show him he was messing with the wrong girl. Somehow, she'd show him. Deep in the confines of her study, Admiral Arali Tejo stared at her omnipad and fumed. In the weeks since that debacle of a commencement, her social engagements had dropped like a stone into the abysmal chasm. Despite the best efforts of the Imperial Ministry of Propaganda and Relations, video footage was still circulating of her collapsing on that damn stage. There were even memes of her laying there like a felled Turox in front of that human. Memes! Her contacts at NPR were still telling her they were trying to stamp the video out, but there was only so much they could do without being obvious. And anyway, it was just light-hearted fun. She could read between the lines. While the Imperium wasn't going to allow outright criticism of the Navy, she was a retired admiral now. NPR didn't give a damn about her book tour or her social life, the cancelled party invitations, the declining book sales. It will blow over, they said. Best not to make a fuss and draw attention, they said. What a recipe for doing nothing. None of those women in NPR had seen a day in combat, much less been to Earth. They just didn't know. O'Reilly was willing to bet half of them hadn't even been out of school, while she'd been there trapped under the rubble, suffocating under that collapsed building, and gasping for air in the darkness. They didn't know what it was like to have males attempt to drive knives into your neck, or to watch them die with a hole burned through their chests, the hate never leaving their eyes. No, they were perfectly safe from the horrors of war, comfortably tucked away in their little offices in the capital. Now, humans were starting to come here. It made her sick when they started infiltrating the Marines, the patrol, even recruits coming into her beloved Navy. Oh, sure, NPR must have thought it was wonderful all those years ago, when they could do pretty puff stories and how humans were going to make a great addition to the Imperium, and touting it all up as part of the victory. O'Reilly had swallowed her gall and accepted it, because of course they were going to do that. And anyway, it had made her look good in the process, but she knew. How could anyone not see what was happening? It was nothing less than disgusting that an Imperial princess had married one. Now those loathsome little pink dwarfs were infiltrating the schools, teaching impressionable young girls. And instead of putting a stop to it, people were making memes of her. Had people lost their minds? Fury roiled as she slammed a fist on the arm of her chair, almost shaking with rage at the stupidity of it all. If she ever got the chance, she would show that human. She'd show them all the danger they were in, one way or another.